My wife cheated on me with my own brother, my family lied, I left but now she wants me back. My name is Aaron, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought I'd be the one to share a story like this, but life has a funny way of turning everything upside down. I've always been a family guy, raised in a loving home, surrounded by people I thought I could trust. I had a good job, a house in the suburbs, and most importantly, a wife, Emily, who I thought was my soulmate. We'd been married for 7 years, and like every couple, we'd had our ups and downs. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to find out. It all started a few months ago. I work in construction management, and it's no surprise that my schedule can be pretty demanding. I'd be gone for long hours, sometimes even overnight if a project was running late. I always believed Emily understood the sacrifices I made to provide for us. I trusted her, trusted that she was holding things down at home while I was out there, making sure our future was secure. We'd even started talking about having kids soon. Life was supposed to be good, but there was this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. You know, when something just doesn't feel right. Emily had been distant lately. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Maybe she was feeling overwhelmed with the idea of starting a family, or maybe she was just tired of me working all the time. I tried to be more attentive, planned date nights, even took a few days off work to spend more time with her. But nothing seemed to change. And then one day, I noticed something off with my brother, Jake. He's 3 years younger than me, and we've always been close, closer than most brothers, I'd say. He'd been over to our house a lot recently, always offering to help with things around the house while I was away. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, he's family. Why wouldn't I trust him? But then, there were these little moments that started to feel off. Jake and Emily would exchange glances during family dinners, or they'd share inside jokes that I wasn't a part of. I brushed it off as paranoia. I didn't want to be that guy, you know? The one who suspects his own wife and brother of something so disgusting. But those feelings kept growing, gnawing at me, until I couldn't ignore them anymore. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I came home earlier than expected. I didn't text Emily like I usually did because I wanted to surprise her. I'd been thinking about her all day, hoping maybe we could finally reconnect. When I walked into the house, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Emily? I called out, but there was no answer. My heart raced a little as I made my way to the bedroom, trying to convince myself that I was being ridiculous. And then I heard it. A sound that I can still hear in my head, clear as day, the sound of whispers and muffled voices. My stomach dropped. I pushed open the bedroom door and there they were. Emily and Jake. Together. In our bed. The world stopped. I stood there frozen, staring at the two people I trusted most in my life betraying me in the worst way imaginable. Emily's face turned white, and Jake jumped out of the bed, stammering some bullshit excuse about how it wasn't what it looked like. But it was exactly what it looked like. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind went blank, my body numb. I turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and kept walking until I couldn't feel anything anymore. I don't know how long I walked, but by the time I stopped, it was dark and I was miles away from home. That night, I didn't go back. I crashed at a friend's place, not ready to face the reality of what I'd just seen. The betrayal from my wife was one thing, but from my own brother? It was too much. I couldn't think straight. The next morning, my phone was flooded with texts and missed calls from both Emily and Jake. Each message was a pathetic attempt at damage control, full of apologies and promises that it was a mistake and that it didn't mean anything. How could they expect me to believe that? How could they think I'd ever forgive them? But the worst part wasn't even them. No, the worst part came when I finally talked to my parents about what happened. I thought they'd be on my side, that they'd be furious with Jake, ready to disown him for what he'd done. But instead, I was met with silence. My mom, bless her heart, tried to smooth things over, saying, "Aaron, honey, it was a mistake. Jake didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to hurt me. He slept with my wife. In what world is that excusable?" I was done. With all of them. I packed a bag and left, cutting off contact with Emily, Jake, and even my parents. I couldn't deal with the lies, the betrayal, the fact that the people who were supposed to have my back didn't care about what happened to me. It's been months now, and I'm trying to rebuild my life. I got my own place, focused on work, and started seeing a therapist to work through the anger and pain. I've been doing better, until last week when Emily showed up at my door. She was crying, begging me to take her back, saying she'd made a mistake and that she still loved me. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, but another part of me, the part that remembers the good times, the love we once shared, couldn't just turn her away. And now, I don't know what to do. Should I forgive her? Should I let her back into my life after everything she's done? Or is this just another lie, another manipulation to try and reel me back in? I stood there, staring at Emily as she cried on my doorstep. Her once bright, confident demeanor was shattered, replaced by this hollow version of herself. She looked broken, but I couldn't tell if it was because she truly regretted what she'd done or because she realized she had lost me. "You have to believe me, Aaron," she sobbed, her voice cracking with every word. "I never meant to hurt you like this. It was a mistake, a huge, horrible mistake. Please, just hear me out." For a moment, I was paralyzed. I didn't know if I should let her in or slam the door in her face. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to react. My heart? It was a mess. Despite everything, seeing her so broken stirred up old feelings I had tried so hard to bury. I loved this woman once. Hell, a part of me probably still did. But how do you come back from something like this? How do you rebuild trust after the people closest to you rip your life apart? Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. I wasn't ready to talk, but I didn't want the neighbors witnessing this whole thing unfold on my doorstep either. Emily walked in slowly, almost as if she was scared of what was coming next. I could feel the tension thick in the air, and I hated it. We used to be so close, so in sync, and now we were just two broken people standing in the ruins of what was once our marriage. We sat on opposite ends of the couch. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I did, I'd either explode with anger or break down into a mess of emotions I wasn't ready to confront. She started talking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've messed up. I know what I did is unforgivable. But Aaron, please understand, I never meant for any of this to happen. It just did." That phrase, "it just did," made my blood boil. Nothing just happens. Cheating doesn't just happen. You don't accidentally sleep with your husband's brother. But I kept quiet, letting her continue. "Jake and it started small. We were just talking at first, mostly about you actually. I was feeling so lonely with you gone all the time, and he was there for me. I know it's no excuse, but I was feeling so disconnected from you and I made a mistake. A mistake. That word again." She kept throwing it around like it was a simple slip-up, like she'd tripped and fallen into Jake's arms by accident. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I finally said, my voice tight with anger. "You didn't just cheat on me, Emily. You cheated with my brother. You destroyed everything." "I know," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Aaron. And I hate myself for it. Every day since it happened, I've hated myself. I can't sleep, I can't eat. I think about you all the time, about what I've done, and I wish I could take it all back." She was sobbing uncontrollably now, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. I didn't have the capacity for that. Not after what she'd done. "I was broken too, Emily," I said, my voice low but firm. "I was out there working my ass off, trying to provide for us, for our future, and this is how you repay me? By crawling into bed with my brother?" She flinched at my words, and for a second, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. She deserved to feel that pain, to feel the weight of what she'd done. But even in that moment, a part of me felt conflicted. How did things get so bad between us that this is where we ended up? "I know I hurt you, Aaron," she whispered, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. I want to save our marriage. I want us to be the way we were before everything went wrong. Before everything went wrong." Her words echoed in my head, and I wondered if that was even possible. Could we ever go back to what we were before? Could I ever look at her again without seeing her and Jake together in my mind? I ran my hand through my hair, trying to think. Why now, Emily? Why show up now, after months of silence? What changed? She looked up at me, wiping her tear-streaked face. "I needed time, Stern. Time to figure out what I wanted, to figure out if I could live with myself after what I did. And I can't. I can't live with myself knowing I ruined everything between us. I want to make it right. Make it right?" I scoffed. "How do you expect to make this right, Emily? What, you think we can just go back to the way things were and pretend like none of this happened?" "No," she said quietly. "I know it won't be that simple, but I'm willing to fight for us. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." I shook my head, feeling the weight of her words sink in. I didn't know if I had it in me to fight for this anymore. I didn't know if there was anything left to fight for. As if reading my thoughts, Emily spoke again. "I know I hurt you. I know I hurt us. But Aaron, I still love you. I've always loved you." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. I walked to the window, staring out into the street, trying to process everything. Emily loved me? How could she claim to love me after what she did? But as much as I wanted to deny it, as much as I wanted to scream at her and tell her to leave, I couldn't shake the part of me that still cared. The part of me that remembered the good times, the laughter, the love we used to share. I couldn't just erase that from my memory, no matter how much I wanted to. Emily, I said finally, turning back to face her. You need to give me time. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I need to figure this out on my own. Her face fell, but she nodded, wiping away the last of her tears. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting for you. With that, she left, closing the door softly behind her. And just like that, I was alone again, left with nothing but my thoughts and the pieces of my broken heart. After Emily left, the silence in the house was deafening. I stood by the window for what felt like hours, watching as she walked down the street, her figure getting smaller and smaller until she disappeared around the corner. I couldn't process everything that had just happened. Part of me felt relieved that she was gone, but another part of me, one I hated, felt guilty. Guilty for pushing her away, for not slamming the door in her face immediately, and guilty for still caring about her. The following days blurred together. I kept myself busy with work, anything to avoid thinking about Emily, Jake, and the train wreck that was my life. I avoided phone calls from my parents and ignored the occasional message from Jake. I wasn't ready to face them, any of them. How could I? But as the days passed, the anger that had fueled me started to dull, replaced by a heavy, oppressive sadness. It was like I was stuck in a fog, unable to see a way out. I kept replaying everything in my mind, every conversation, every glance between Emily and Jake that I had brushed off, every time I ignored that gut feeling that something wasn't right. How could I have been so blind? One evening, after another long day at work, I got home and finally opened a bottle of whiskey that had been sitting in my kitchen for weeks. I poured myself a glass, sat down on the couch, and stared at the wall. The memories flooded back, one after another, and for the first time since it all happened, I let myself truly feel the weight of it. My own brother. I still couldn't wrap my head around it. We'd grown up together, gone through everything side by side. He was the last person I ever thought would betray me. But he did. And what hurt even more was the fact that, deep down, I think I always knew something was off. I just didn't want to believe it. I took another sip of whiskey, feeling the burn in my throat. I hadn't talked to Jake since that night. I couldn't bring myself to face him. How do you look your brother in the eye after something like that? How do you even start to have that conversation? Just as I was about to pour myself another drink, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, half expecting it to be another message from Emily or Jake. But it wasn't. It was my mom. For a moment, I debated ignoring it like I had so many times before, but something inside me told me to pick up. Maybe it was the alcohol loosening my inhibitions, or maybe I was just tired of running from everything. Either way, I answered. Aaron, my mom's voice was soft, hesitant, like she wasn't sure how to start. It's been a while. How are you holding up? I sighed, rubbing my forehead. I'm fine, Mom. Just busy. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could feel the weight of what she wasn't saying. I know things have been difficult, she said finally, but we need to talk about this. You can't keep avoiding your family. I clenched my jaw, the familiar anger bubbling up again. Avoiding my family? Mom, Jake slept with my wife. My wife? How am I supposed to just act like everything's okay? I'm not asking you to act like everything's okay, she said quietly. But Jake, he's your brother. And families make mistakes. We need to stick together. I could feel the whiskey dulling my senses, making it harder to keep my emotions in check. Mistakes? I spat. Sleeping with your brother's wife isn't a mistake, Mom. It's a betrayal. You know that. There was another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was trembling. I know, Aaron. But you can't just throw everything away because of one mistake. Your father and we've been talking to Jake, and he regrets what happened. He wants to make things right. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. Make things right? How exactly? You think we can just sit down, have a family dinner, and pretend like none of this ever happened? No, she said, and I could hear the pain in her voice now. But we can try to heal. As a family. I was silent for a long time, staring into the amber liquid in my glass. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her that Jake wasn't my brother anymore, that I didn't have a family after what they did. But another part of me, the part that was still that scared little kid who didn't want to lose the people he loved, wanted to believe her. I don't know, Mom, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do this. She sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. I understand. Just promise me you'll think about it. We miss you, Aaron. We love you. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I ended the call, tossed my phone onto the couch, and drained the rest of my drink. My head was spinning now, not just from the alcohol, but from the weight of everything. I was torn between the anger that had consumed me for months and the tiny, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe I could find it in me to forgive. But how could I? How could I forgive the people who had torn my life apart? Over the next few days, I avoided my family's calls. I didn't go to work either. I couldn't bring myself to face anyone, not even my coworkers. Instead, I stayed holed up in my apartment, drinking more than I should and trying to block out the memories that kept surfacing. But no matter how much I drank, no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the thoughts kept coming back. Emily, my parents. How did everything go so wrong? And then one night I snapped. It was late, probably close to midnight, when I finally broke. I grabbed my phone and dialed Jake's number. I wasn't even sure what I was going to say, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. He picked up on the third ring. Aaron? His voice was tentative, like he was afraid of what was coming next. What the hell is wrong with you? I blurted out, the anger spilling out of me before I could stop it. How could you do this to me? To your own brother? There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he'd hung up. But then he spoke, his voice low and full of regret. I'm sorry, Aaron. I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen. You never wanted this to happen? I shouted, my voice shaking. You slept with my wife, Jake. You destroyed my life. How can you even say that? I don't know what to say, he whispered, his voice breaking. I was stupid. I made a horrible mistake. But Aaron, please, you have to believe me. It didn't mean anything. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You weren't trying to hurt me? Well, congratulations, Jake. You did. You hurt me more than anyone else ever has. There was another long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I know, and I hate myself for it every day. I was silent, my chest heaving with anger and pain. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if there was anything left to say. I want to make it right, Aaron, he said softly. I don't know how, but I'll do whatever it takes. I miss you, man. You're my brother. I clenched my jaw, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill over. You stopped being my brother the moment you decided to sleep with my wife, Jake. Don't ever call me again. And with that, I hung up, my hand shaking as I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall with a loud thud, the screen shattering on impact. But I didn't care. Nothing mattered anymore. I was alone. Truly alone. After that phone call with Jake, I felt like I had finally said what I needed to say. But instead of feeling relief, I felt more hollow than ever. The anger that had kept me going for so long was starting to fade, and in its place was a deep sadness that I couldn't shake. I had cut off my family, the people who were supposed to be there for me through everything. But how could I look at them the same way again? Days turned into weeks, and I continued to isolate myself. I barely left the apartment, and when I did, it was only for necessities, food, alcohol, and occasionally work, though I'd been skipping more than I should. My boss, thankfully, seemed to understand, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. Everyone had their limits. One afternoon, after another sleepless night, I found myself scrolling through old pictures on my phone. Pictures of Emily and me back when things were good, smiling at the beach, cuddling on the couch during movie nights, laughing with friends. It was like looking at a different life, one that I couldn't recognize anymore. How had everything fallen apart so fast? Just as I was about to toss my phone aside, I got a text. My stomach twisted when I saw it was from Emily. We hadn't spoken since that day she came to my apartment, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to read what she had to say. But curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. Aaron, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to talk to you. It's important. Please, just give me one more chance to explain. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. What more could she possibly say? We'd already had the conversation. She cheated, she regretted it, but it didn't change what had happened. Still, something about the way she phrased it, it's important, made me uneasy. Against my better judgment, I replied. What is there left to explain? It didn't take long for her to respond. Please, Aaron, just meet me one last time. After that, if you don't want to talk to me ever again, I'll respect your decision. But I need you to know the full truth. The full truth? I thought I already knew everything. She had cheated on me with my brother. What more could there be? But I couldn't deny the gnawing feeling in my gut that there was more to this story, something I hadn't yet uncovered. I hesitated for a long time before finally typing back. One last time. She replied with a time and place. A small park near where we used to live together. I hadn't been there since everything had gone down, and just the thought of it made my chest tighten. But if there was something more to this, I needed to know. For my own sanity, I had to know. The day of our meeting came, and I arrived at the park earlier than I'd expected. It was quiet, the crisp autumn air carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. I found a bench and sat down, my mind racing. What could she possibly tell me that would make any of this better? A few minutes later, I saw her walking toward me. She looked tired, her face pale and gaunt, like she hadn't been sleeping much either. There was no makeup, no pretense, just Emily, raw and exposed. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her, but I quickly pushed it aside. I couldn't let myself get sucked back into that. She sat down next to me, leaving a noticeable gap between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, awkward, filled with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting for her to get to the point. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "I know you think you have the full story, Erin. But there's more that I haven't told you." My heart started to race, a mixture of dread and anticipation swirling in my chest. "What more could there possibly be, Emily? You slept with Jake. What else is there to know?" She winced at my words, but nodded. "You're right. I did. But it wasn't just about me being lonely or us drifting apart. There's something else, something I've been keeping from you. Something I didn't even want to admit to myself until recently." I narrowed my eyes, trying to read her expression. There was fear there, but also a deep sadness that I hadn't noticed before. "What is it?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. "Pregnant? Was it?" Before I could even ask the question, she answered it. "I don't know if it's yours or Jake's," she said, her voice cracking. "That's why I didn't tell you before. I didn't want to make things worse. But I can't keep it a secret any longer. I had to tell you the truth." The world around me seemed to spin, the ground shifting beneath my feet. Pregnant. She was pregnant. And she didn't know who the father was. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How long had she known? How long had she been carrying this secret while I was spiraling in the dark? "When did you find out?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "A few weeks after everything happened," she admitted, tears filling her eyes. I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought maybe I was just stressed, that my body was reacting to all the chaos. But when I took the test and it was positive, I knew I couldn't keep it from you. I couldn't think. I couldn't feel anything except a cold, hollow numbness settling in my chest. Pregnant. And it might not even be mine. How is this my life? "You waited months to tell me," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You've been walking around carrying this, and you didn't think I had the right to know?" "I was scared, Erin," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't even know how to deal with it myself." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. I paced back and forth in front of the bench, my hands running through my hair as I tried to process everything. "Scared?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You were scared? What about me, Emily? You think I wasn't terrified this whole time? You think I haven't been losing my mind, wondering how everything went so wrong? And now you drop this on me, now?" She didn't say anything, just sat there, her head bowed, tears streaming down her face. And for the first time, I saw her not just as the woman who had betrayed me, but as someone who was just as lost and broken as I was. But that didn't make it better. That didn't fix anything. I stopped pacing and looked down at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you expect me to do with this, Emily? What do you want from me?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't know. I needed you to know. I can't do this alone." I stared at her for what felt like an eternity, the weight of her words crushing me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I could handle this, handle any of it. "I need time," I said finally, my voice cold and distant. "I need to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with all of this." She nodded, her face crumpling with emotion. "Take all the time you need." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting on that bench, the weight of her confession still hanging heavy in the air. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to look at her the same way again. After that day in the park, I couldn't escape the suffocating weight of Emily's confession. She was pregnant, and there was a chance that the baby wasn't even mine. It was like a knife twisting in an already open wound. I had walked away from her, but no matter how far I tried to run, the reality of the situation kept pulling me back in. I spent the next few days in a daze, drinking more than I should have, staring at my phone, debating whether or not to call her. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to move forward with this? The thought of raising a child, especially one that might be Jake's, was something I couldn't even begin to process. But then the question started to creep in. What if the baby was mine? Could I live with the guilt of abandoning my own child just because of what Emily had done? I was stuck between my anger and a sense of responsibility that I couldn't shake. Eventually, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I needed answers. I needed clarity. And the only way to get that was by confronting the situation head-on, no matter how painful it might be. I called Emily. She picked up on the second ring. Aaron? Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't sure what to say either, but I knew we couldn't leave things hanging in the air forever. We need to figure this out, I said, my voice flat. We need to know whose baby it is. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I know, she whispered. I've been thinking about that too. I've already spoken to the doctor about a paternity test. They can do one before the baby is born. My stomach churned at the thought. It wasn't just about finding out the truth, it was about what that truth would mean for the rest of my life. But there was no avoiding it. I had to know. Okay, I said quietly. Let's do it. The weeks leading up to the test were agonizing. Every day felt like a battle between the part of me that wanted the baby to be mine, so I could hold on to some semblance of normalcy, and the part of me that dreaded the possibility that it wasn't. I avoided my family, ignored Jake's messages, and cut myself off from everyone, sinking deeper into my own isolation. On the day of the test, Emily and I met at the clinic. The tension between us was thick, the air filled with unspoken words. She looked fragile, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from what I assumed were sleepless nights of her own. We didn't talk much. There wasn't anything left to say until we had the results. The procedure itself was quick, just a blood sample from Emily and a cheek swab from me. But the waiting? That was the real torture. They told us it would take about a week to get the results, and that week stretched on forever. During that time, I went through every possible scenario in my head. What if the baby was mine? What if it wasn't? Could I ever forgive Emily if it was Jake's? Could I even look my own brother in the eye again? Every thought was a dead end, and no matter how hard I tried to imagine a way forward, I couldn't see one. Then, the day finally came. Emily called me with the results. I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for her to speak. The silence on the other end of the line was unbearable. It's yours, she said, her voice shaking. The baby is yours, Aaron. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The relief was immediate, but it was quickly followed by a wave of conflicting emotions. The baby was mine, but that didn't erase everything else that had happened. It didn't undo the betrayal, the lies, the months of pain. So, what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, there was a sadness in her voice that mirrored my own. I don't know. I want to make things right, Aaron. I want us to try to be a family. But I know that's asking too much after everything I've done. I closed my eyes, rubbing my temples as I tried to sort through the chaos in my head. Could I really do this? Could I forgive her and try to rebuild our life together for the sake of our child? Or would I just be setting myself up for more heartbreak down the road? I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said slowly, trying to keep my emotions in check. You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You shattered everything. And I don't know if that's something I can ever get over. She didn't argue. She didn't try to make excuses. She just listened, tears choking her words when she finally responded. I understand. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm still here, and I'm going to be here for our child, no matter what happens between us. That was the crux of it. No matter how much I wanted to run from the pain, I couldn't run from my responsibility as a father. This child didn't ask to be born into this mess. And no matter how much I hated the situation, I couldn't abandon my own kid. I'll be there for the baby, I said, my voice firm. We'll figure out a way to co-parent. But as for us, I don't know if there's an us anymore. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of Emily quietly sobbing on the other end of the line. I felt a pang of guilt, but I couldn't let that sway me. I had to protect myself this time. We'll take it one step at a time, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for not giving up on the baby." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I had a child on the way, a child that would always tie me to Emily, no matter how much I wanted to forget what had happened. But at least I had some clarity now. At least I knew what the future held, even if it wasn't the one I had imagined. In the weeks that followed, I started to come to terms with my new reality. I told my parents about the baby, and while they were happy, I could tell they were also walking on eggshells around me, unsure of how to navigate the delicate situation with Jake. I hadn't spoken to him since that night I called him in a rage, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. Emily and I agreed to focus on co-parenting. We attended a few doctor's appointments together, but it was strictly business. No lingering glances, no attempts to rekindle anything. I wasn't ready for that, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. As the months passed, I found myself slowly healing. The anger that had consumed me for so long started to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. I had a baby on the way, a new life to look forward to, a new chapter that wasn't tied to the pain of the past. The day our baby was born, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. Holding my daughter in my arms for the first time, I realized that, despite everything, there was still something good that had come out of all this. She was my future now, and for her sake, I had to let go of the past. Emily and I would never be what we once were. Too much had happened. Too much had been broken. But we would always be connected through our daughter, and that was enough. It had to be. In the end, I chose to move forward, not for Emily, not for Jake, but for myself and for my daughter. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could decide how I would live with it. And for the first time in months, I felt like I had a future again. If you like such stories, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. It will be the biggest support for me.